You are lying on the floor of a cave 200,000 years ago. There is no mattress, no pillow, no blanket, with a suspiciously high thread count. There is just stone, dirt, yesterday's food, somebody's abandoned stone flakes, and an impressive number of tiny creatures that consider your sleeping body an all-night buffet. You close your eyes anyway, because sleep is not optional. Your brain demands it, your muscles demand it, and evolution has apparently decided that the best way to perform essential biological maintenance is to shut down most of your awareness for several hours in a world full of teeth. And then, at some point, someone does something surprisingly modern. They clean the floor. They gather armfuls of grass. They carry it into the shelter. They spread it into a thick layer beneath the body. In some places, they may even place that grass over ash, because ash is a terrible surface if you are a flea, a tick, or anything else hoping to move into a human armpit before sunrise. That may have been one of the earliest beds ever made. Not a wooden frame, not furniture, not even something you would confidently show to a hotel inspector. Just grass, ash, fire, and the revolutionary realization that perhaps the ground did not have to remain exactly as nature left it. But comfort may not have been the main reason humans started building beds. Sleep is the moment when the most dangerous animal in the landscape voluntarily closes its eyes, stops moving, and becomes remarkably easy to bite. So why did humans begin creating special places to become unconscious? The answer involves microscopic grass remains, burned bedding, insect-repelling plants, organized cave floors, and a behavior that may be much older than our own species. But before there were beds, there were nests. The short answer is that humans probably started sleeping on beds, because beds were warmer, softer, cleaner, and slightly less interested in biting them. The long answer is considerably stranger, because the first problem we run into is this. What exactly counts as a bed? If you place grass on the ground and sleep on it, is that a bed? If you pile leaves together every night and throw them away the next morning, is that a bed? If you build a raised wooden platform but never put anything on top of it, is that a bed? In archaeological language, bedding does not necessarily mean a raised bed. It can mean a deliberately prepared plant surface used for sleeping, resting, working, or several of those things at once. Archaeologists, somewhat inconveniently, do not get to interview the people involved. Nobody at Border Cave left behind a note saying, "Property of Greg. Please do not sit on sleeping area." Most prehistoric beds were made from exactly the kinds of things archaeology hates the most. Grass, leaves, branches, animal skins, plant fibers. All the materials that disappear first. Stone tools survive for millions of years, because stone is basically immortal by archaeological standards. A mattress, on the other hand, is archaeologically inconsiderate. It rots, collapses, dissolves, and leaves researchers arguing passionately over what is essentially ancient dust. Which means the first bed humans ever built was almost certainly older than the oldest bed we have ever found. That distinction matters. The oldest confirmed evidence is not the same thing as the first example. The oldest surviving wooden ship is not the first ship. The oldest surviving shoe is not the first shoe. And the oldest preserved bedding is almost certainly not humanity's first attempt at making the ground less awful. What archaeologists are often looking for instead are indirect clues. Microscopic silica structures from plants called phytoliths, layers of ash, chemical traces, patterns in the sediment, tiny details that survive long after the people who created them are gone. Sometimes the evidence for a human behavior survives only because something incredibly small refused to disappear. The history of clothing has lice. The history of diet has dental plaque. The history of sleeping has microscopic silica structures formed inside grasses, along with fragile plant traces preserved in cave sediment for 200,000 years. Human prehistory, more often than not, is forensic science conducted on extremely uncooperative suspects. And those tiny traces are about to lead us somewhere much older than beds. Because before humans were improving the ground, our relatives were avoiding it altogether. Before humans made beds, apes were already building them. Across the great apes, chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans regularly construct sleeping nests from branches, leaves, or other vegetation. Some are built in trees. Others, especially among gorillas, may be built on the ground. They do not simply find a comfortable-looking branch and hope for the best. They build. A chimpanzee may choose flexible branches for the base, stronger branches for support, and leafy twigs for cushioning. The result is not random debris. It is a structure designed to hold body weight through the night without collapsing and delivering the sleeper directly to the forest floor, which is generally considered a poor feature in a bed. Some great apes build a new sleeping nest almost every evening. Others reuse locations or construct daytime resting platforms. The details vary by species and habitat, but the underlying behavior is clear. Sleeping surfaces are actively made, and they solve several problems at once. A nest stabilizes the body. It creates insulation. It may reduce exposure to insects. It lifts the sleeper away from damp ground, snakes, crawling parasites, and whatever else is moving around below with private intentions. There is even evidence that chimpanzees select particular tree species because their branches have useful mechanical properties. Some are stiff enough to support weight, but flexible enough to form a spring-like platform. In other words, chimpanzees may understand mattress engineering better than some low-budget hotels. This does not mean that a chimpanzee nest is literally the ancestor of your bed. Evolution does not preserve behaviors in a neat straight line with instruction manuals attached. But it tells us something important. The instinct to modify a sleeping surface may be far older than Homo sapiens. It may reach back into the shared behavioral world of earlier apes and hominins. Our ancestors did not necessarily invent the idea of building a place to sleep from nothing. They may already have possessed a basic template. Do not simply lie where you stop. Gather material. Shape it. Create separation between the body and the environment. The major change came when hominins began spending more time on the ground. A nest in a tree protects you from one set of problems. A bed on a cave floor has to solve another. Trees provide elevation. The ground provides cold stone, moisture, dust, insects, waste, and predators with considerably easier access. Once our ancestors came down from the branches, the old sleeping problem did not disappear. It became harder. And the solution had to move with them. The ground looks solid. That is the problem. A sleeping body does not hover politely above the surface beneath it. It presses into it for hours. And during those hours, heat, moisture, pressure, insects, dust, and whatever else is living in the floor all get uninterrupted access. Start with temperature. When your body lies directly on cold stone or damp earth, heat moves out of you through conduction. The ground does not need to be frozen. It only needs to be cooler than your skin, which is an extremely low bar for most caves at night. You can generate more heat by shivering, but shivering is not ideal sleep technology. It burns energy, interrupts rest, and makes the night feel less like recovery and more like your muscles filing a formal complaint. Then there is moisture. Soil and cave floors hold water. Even when they do not look wet, they can pull warmth from the body and keep skin, hair, and clothing damp for hours. Dampness softens skin, increases friction, encourages fungal growth, and makes cold conditions much harder to tolerate. Now, add pressure. Human bodies have bones very close to the surface in certain places. Hips, shoulders, elbows, heels. On hard ground, these points carry much of the body's weight. The result is pain, numbness, interrupted sleep, and constant repositioning. And that matters because sleep is not just lying down with your eyes closed. It is a biological state in which awareness drops, reaction time disappears, and your ability to monitor threats becomes dramatically worse. Your brain is busy consolidating memory, regulating hormones, repairing tissue, and performing the nightly maintenance required to keep you functional. Meanwhile, most of your security systems are offline. You are less likely to notice an insect crawling across your leg, less likely to detect something moving near your head, less able to protect exposed skin from bites, less able to respond quickly to falling temperature or accumulating smoke. A layer of grass does not solve every danger. It will not stop a leopard, seal a cave entrance, or negotiate with a snake, but it changes the immediate environment around the body. Dry plant material traps pockets of air and slows heat loss. It cushions pressure points. It absorbs some moisture. It creates a physical barrier between skin and soil. It makes crawling insects travel farther before reaching flesh. That final point may sound small. It is not. Parasites do not need to kill you to become an evolutionary problem. Repeated bites cause blood loss, inflammation, infection, itching, and broken skin. Broken skin in a world without antibiotics is not a minor inconvenience. It is an invitation. A raised or padded sleeping surface therefore does something deceptively important. It turns the ground from an unavoidable condition into a manageable one. And once humans began managing the floor beneath their sleeping bodies, they were no longer merely choosing where to rest. They were engineering the night. The ground was a problem. But when did humans begin changing it on purpose? Around 200,000 years ago, someone inside Border Cave in what is now South Africa did something so ordinary that it almost disappeared from history completely. They changed the floor. Not the cave. Not the landscape. The floor. Archaeologists working at the site discovered concentrated traces of grasses and other plant material in specific occupied areas of the cave. Their botanical composition, density, and archaeological context are consistent with plants having been deliberately gathered and laid down in layers, which is exactly what makes them interesting. Because prehistoric humans collected plants for many reasons. Food, fuel, tools, medicine. But when large amounts of grass repeatedly appear in sheltered locations where people lived, sat, worked, and likely rested, another possibility enters the conversation. Someone may have built a surface. This evidence pushes constructed bedding in southern Africa back to at least around 200,000 years ago. That is an astonishing date. The Roman Empire disappears. Agriculture disappears. Cities disappear. Writing disappears. The pyramids disappear. You can keep deleting human history almost indefinitely before these layers of grass finally decide to show up. And yet the evidence itself is almost absurdly small. No mattress survives. No frame survives. No blanket survives. No helpful sign saying, "Sleeping area. Please remove muddy feet." Just fragile plant traces preserved in cave sediment. This is one of the strange rules of archaeology. The larger the behavior, the smaller the evidence often becomes. Entire migrations survive as a few teeth. Possible symbolic behavior survives as pigments, engravings, and carefully modified objects. The first clothing survives as lice genetics. And one of humanity's earliest bedrooms survives as microscopic grass. Researchers believe these plant layers probably formed surfaces used for sleeping, resting, or daily activities. That distinction matters. Calling them beds is useful, but it can also be misleading. When modern people hear the word bed, they imagine furniture, a frame, a mattress, possibly an argument over blankets. Border Cave gives us something much older and much stranger. Not furniture, infrastructure. A deliberately engineered patch of environment designed to make human bodies function more effectively. And then archaeologists notice something underneath some of that grass. Ash. Which raises an obvious question. Why would anyone build a bed on top of the remains of a fire? Ash is what remains after fire has taken almost everything useful from wood. It is light, dry, powdery, and generally something modern humans sweep away while wondering why they ever thought an indoor fireplace would be relaxing. At Border Cave, however, ash may have been part of the solution. Some of the ancient grass layers appear to have been placed over older deposits of ash. That arrangement could be accidental. People were living around fires. Fires leave ash. Grass placed on a cave floor will inevitably end up near it. But there is another possibility. Ash may have helped make the sleeping surface less welcoming to insects. Many crawling arthropods depend on moisture and flexible joints to move efficiently. Fine ash can absorb moisture, clog small openings, cling to legs, and make crossing the surface physically difficult. It is not a magical force field. A determined insect can still cross it. But if you are a tick, flea, mite, or other small creature attempting to reach a warm mammal in the dark, a dry layer of abrasive powder is not an encouraging beginning. Ash may also have helped keep the surface dry. It could cover damp soil, absorb organic residue, and create a cleaner base for fresh plant material. And because it was already available wherever people maintained hearths, it required no separate expedition to collect. But we need to be careful. The presence of grass over ash does not prove that the people at Border Cave understood pest control in the way we do. They did not need a theory of insect respiration or a detailed classification of mites. They only needed experience. Perhaps people noticed that certain sleeping areas had fewer bites. Perhaps ash-covered floors stayed drier. Perhaps bedding placed there lasted longer. Perhaps the pattern was copied because it worked, even if nobody could explain why. There is also a darker possibility. Ash may not always have been laid down carefully before fresh grass arrived. Some of it may have come from burning old bedding. That would make practical sense. Used plant material collects sweat, food scraps, broken fibers, shed skin, feces from insects, and the insects themselves. Leave it in place long enough, and the bed stops being protection from the floor. It becomes a new floor with its own population. Burning the old layer would destroy pests, reduce waste, and clear the surface for another round of bedding. It would also create more ash, which could then become the base for the next layer. And that matters because maintenance requires more than discovering that grass feels better than stone. It requires people to recognize when a sleeping surface has become dirty, remember what to do about it, invest labor in replacing it, and repeat the process over time. A bed, even at this early stage, was not simply an object. It was a routine. And at another site in South Africa, that routine becomes even harder to dismiss as accidental. Because there, people did not appear to gather just any plants. They may have chosen the ones insects hated. So what were the first beds actually for? Probably several things at once. A pile of grass is softer than stone. That part is obvious. But softness is not trivial when the body must remain in one position for hours. A softer surface reduces pressure on the hips, shoulders, ribs, and spine. It could reduce painful repositioning and make sustained rest easier. And deeper sleep matters because sleep supports memory, immune function, tissue repair, emotional regulation, and almost every other system keeping a human alive and tolerable. Then there is warmth. Dry grass traps air. Air is a poor conductor of heat, which is excellent news when the alternative is donating body temperature directly to a cold cave floor all night. Then there is moisture. Plant material can keep the body above damp soil and absorb some of the water, sweat, and condensation that would otherwise remain against the skin. This is the point where comfort becomes something larger. So the earliest bedding was probably not invented because one individual suddenly demanded a more elegant bedroom. It was useful because it made the sleeping body easier to maintain. Softer, warmer, drier, cleaner, less accessible to insects, more predictable. That final word may be the most important. A bed creates a small zone where the environment behaves differently from the rest of the world. Outside that zone, the ground may be cold, wet, sharp, dirty, or alive. Inside it, at least for a few hours, the body knows what to expect. And once humans learned to build that predictable zone, they could improve it. At Sibudu Cave, around 77,000 years ago, the evidence suggests they may have done exactly that, because the plants there were not just piled together. Some of them appear to have been selected. At Sibudu Cave, in what is now KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, people were building plant bedding at least 77,000 years ago. And this time, the evidence suggests they were not simply grabbing whatever happened to be green. The bedding was made from layers of sedges and other plant material gathered from nearby river environments. These plants would have created a broad, flexible surface soft enough to lie on, thick enough to separate the body from the cave floor, and abundant enough to replace when the old layer became unpleasant. But mixed into some of those layers were leaves from a tree called Cryptocarya woodii. That is where the story becomes much more interesting. Cryptocarya leaves contain aromatic compounds with insecticidal and larvicidal properties. In modern terms, some of those chemicals can irritate, repel, or kill insects. The people at Sibudu did not know the word larvicide. Fortunately, mosquitoes do not require a chemistry degree before becoming annoyed. Now, this does not prove that someone 77,000 years ago stood beside a tree, analyzed its chemical profile, and announced that it would make an excellent prehistoric insect repellent. There are several possible explanations. The leaves may have smelled pleasant. They may have helped keep the bedding fresh. They may have been abundant and easy to collect. Or, people may have noticed, through repeated experience, that insects were less common around certain plants. That last possibility is difficult to prove directly, but it is entirely plausible. Humans are extremely good at noticing patterns when those patterns involve being bitten less often. And it is not simple knowledge. To use a particular plant consistently, people must recognize it among many others. They must know where it grows, when it is available, how much to collect, and which parts are useful. They must carry it back. They must prepare it. They must decide where to place it. And if the result works, they must pass that behavior to someone else. This is how a bed becomes more than a pile of vegetation. It becomes a delivery system for ecological knowledge. The cave floor at Sibudu was not being accepted as it was found. It was being modified with selected materials that may have changed temperature, smell, moisture, cleanliness, and insect activity all at once. That is a remarkable amount of function for something that still looks, to modern eyes, like leaves on dirt. But there is another clue at Sibudu that makes the pattern even harder to dismiss. These bedding layers were not used once and forgotten. They appear again and again. Built, used, replaced, sometimes burned, then built again. The important invention may not have been the first mattress. It may have been the routine. A bed like this was not difficult to understand. It was difficult to maintain. That distinction matters. Almost anyone can discover that grass feels better than stone. A tired person lies down on vegetation once, notices that the night is less miserable, and the basic principle is established. But a repeated bedding system demands much more. Someone has to recognize the right plants. Someone has to know where they grow. Someone has to decide when the old bedding has become too damp, too dirty, too compressed, or too full of insects to remain useful. Then people have to gather fresh material, carry it back to the shelter, remove the old layer, prepare the floor, and rebuild the surface. But maintenance is one of the foundations of human survival. The repeated bedding layers at places like Sibudu suggest that people were not improvising a new solution every night. They were following a routine. Routines preserve information. This is important because prehistoric technologies are often imagined as objects. A hand axe, a spear point, a needle, something solid enough to hold in a museum case. But many of the most important technologies were procedures. How to control fire, how to prepare hide, how to find water, how to carry an infant safely, how to make a sleeping surface, and when to replace it. Procedures leave weaker archaeological traces, but they may shape daily survival more deeply than a single tool. A bed therefore represents more than material placed beneath a body. It is consistent with planning, memory, plant knowledge, maintenance, and some form of social transmission. At Sibudu, the repeated rebuilding of bedding suggests the same basic pattern operating tens of thousands of years earlier. The surface was not permanent. The knowledge was. And when archaeologists find evidence that old bedding was sometimes burned, they may be seeing the final step in that maintenance cycle. Because eventually, every sleeping surface reaches a point where cleaning it becomes less attractive than setting it on fire. Eventually, every bed loses the argument against biology. Dust accumulates. Fibers break apart. Moisture settles in. Insects arrive. And if enough time passes, the sleeping surface slowly begins evolving into something with priorities very different from your own. At Sibudu Cave, archaeologists found evidence suggesting that bedding layers were repeatedly replaced and that some older layers may have been burned before new material was added. That makes practical sense. Old plant bedding absorbs sweat, traps food fragments, collects parasites, and slowly becomes part of the floor itself. The very thing designed to separate humans from dirt gradually transforms into a new type of dirt. Burning old bedding would solve several problems at once. It would destroy insects, reduce organic waste, remove damaged plant material, create space for fresh bedding, and as a bonus, it would leave behind ash, which may itself have helped create a less welcoming environment for crawling parasites. In some cases, old plant material may have been burned during the clearing and renewal of occupied surfaces. If so, the waste from one bedding cycle helped prepare the next. But we should be careful here. Archaeology is very good at telling us that burning happened. It is much less confident when explaining exactly why. Some bedding may have been deliberately burned as sanitation. Some may have caught fire accidentally. Some may have been cleared during the maintenance of hearths and living areas. The evidence allows several possibilities. Researchers disagree about the balance between them, and that uncertainty is important to keep. What we can say with confidence is simpler. People repeatedly built bedding. People repeatedly replaced bedding. Fire repeatedly interacted with bedding. That combination strongly suggests maintenance rather than coincidence. And maintenance changes the meaning of an object. The important story here may not be that humans invented beds. It may be that humans invented housekeeping, which, if true, commercially, with chores. And once people repeatedly cleaned, rebuilt, and protected the same sleeping surfaces, something else quietly emerged. The cave floor stopped being one thing. Different parts of it started becoming different places. Once people began rebuilding the same sleeping surfaces, the cave floor stopped being a single, undifferentiated space. Some areas were for fire. Some were for cutting meat. Some were for shaping stone. Some collected refuse. And some became places where bodies were expected to lie down. There were no walls, no doors, no private signs, but there was organization. That matters because a living space becomes more than shelter when different parts of it begin carrying different functions. A hearth is not just a fire. It is a center for heat, cooking, light, conversation, tool repair, and protection. A bedding area is not just grass. It is a zone where sharp objects should not remain, where waste should be limited, where bodies can rest, and where the surface may need to be cleaned or replaced. This is the bedroom before the bedroom existed. Not architecture. Behavioral zoning. At sites like Border Cave and Sibudu, bedding appears in contexts that may also have supported sitting, working, and daily activities. So we should not imagine neat prehistoric bedrooms with one bed per person and a tasteful division between sleeping and office space. The reality was probably more flexible. A broad plant surface could serve as a place to rest, repair tools, prepare food, care for an injured person, or keep a child away from the coldest part of the floor. Multifunctional spaces are not primitive. They are efficient. Modern people call this an open-plan interior and then pay extra for it. But repeated placement still creates expectation. If one area is kept cleaner, softer, and less cluttered than the rest, people begin to treat it differently. Tools are moved. Food scraps are pushed away. Fresh plant material is brought in. The space acquires rules even if nobody writes them down. And rules change group behavior. A maintained sleeping area may require cooperation. Someone gathers plants. Someone clears the old material. Someone watches the fire. Someone makes sure sharp flakes do not remain where a body will roll during the night. This does not mean prehistoric camps had formal housekeeping schedules. There was probably no rotating chart scratched onto the cave wall. But any shared sleeping surface creates a shared maintenance problem. And shared problems create social expectations. Who is allowed to use the cleanest area? Where do injured or older members rest? Do infants sleep near adults? Does everyone lie close to the hearth? Or does firelight divide the group? Archaeology cannot answer all of those questions directly. But once space is organized, social meaning is never far behind. The first sleeping areas may therefore have helped do something larger than improve rest. They may have helped turn temporary occupation into domestic order. A cave becomes a camp. A camp becomes familiar. Familiarity creates routine. Routine creates belonging. The bed was no longer only separating the body from the ground. It was helping divide the human world into places. And that raises a much older question. Did humans invent this organized sleeping space themselves? Or were they transforming an ape nest into something collective, repeatable, and domestic? Great apes build sleeping nests. Humans built sleeping places. The difference sounds small. It is not. A chimpanzee nest is usually made for one individual and often for one night. It is assembled, used, and abandoned. The next evening, another nest may appear somewhere else in the forest. That strategy makes sense for an animal that moves through trees and changes sleeping locations frequently. Human bedding at places like Border Cave and Sibudu appears to belong to a different pattern. It was tied to repeated occupation. The surface could be rebuilt in the same shelter. Fresh material could replace old layers. Ash could accumulate beneath it. The area could become part of a larger camp containing fire, tools, food, waste, and other people. The nest moved with the individual. The bed became attached to a place. That attachment changes behavior. A place worth maintaining is a place worth returning to. A place worth returning to begins to accumulate knowledge. Where the dry grass grows, which plants smell better. Where water enters after rain. Which section of the cave stays warmest. Where smoke collects, where insects are worst. Where a sleeping body is safest from sparks, falling stone, or somebody stepping backward while carrying a sharp tool. Over time, the shelter becomes more predictable. And predictability is one of the most valuable things humans manufacture. We cannot control the weather. We cannot control predators. We cannot control whether an animal hunt succeeds. But we can control one patch of floor. That patch can be cleaned, softened, dried, rebuilt, shared. Ape nests show us that constructing a sleeping surface may have deep evolutionary roots. But human bedding added fire, repeated maintenance, plant selection, and collective use to that older behavioral foundation. Probably. That word matters. Organic bedding preserves badly, and we do not have a complete record for Neanderthals, Denisovans, earlier Homo species, or even most Homo sapiens populations. Other human groups may have built sleeping surfaces that vanished completely. They may have used hides, branches, moss, reeds, or other materials that left no recognizable trace. The absence of an ancient mattress is not evidence that everyone slept directly on rock while making no effort to improve the experience. Prehistory is not a complete archive. It is a damaged folder found after most of the building burned down. So we should resist the neat story in which one population invented the bed at one cave on one specific morning. The more realistic story is slower. Different groups probably modified sleeping surfaces in different environments using whatever materials were available. Branches in forests, grass in savannas, reeds near wetlands, hides in colder regions. The principle may have appeared many times because the problem appeared everywhere. A human body still needed to sleep. The ground was still the ground. And once groups began returning to maintained sleeping areas, bedding became part of something larger than rest. It became part of home. Not home as a building. Home as a place the group had changed enough to recognize. A place where the fire belonged there. The tools belonged there. The bedding belonged there. And, eventually, the people belonged there too. From that point onward, the sleeping surface could begin accumulating another layer entirely. Not grass. Meaning, once sleeping surfaces became attached to places, they could begin telling people where they belonged inside those places. Who slept near the fire? Who slept beside whom? Who received the driest surface? Who remained close to the entrance? Who was protected in the center? A sleeping surface can become social long before it develops carved legs or woven sheets, especially when warmth, space, and protection are unevenly distributed. In a small shelter, the warmest, cleanest, safest sleeping area cannot always belong to everyone at once. Someone gets the better position. Someone sleeps closer to smoke. Someone lies where rainwater reaches the floor first. And once sleeping space becomes unequal, it can begin reflecting age, health, intimacy, authority, or status. We cannot reconstruct the sleeping arrangements of a particular group at Border Cave from a layer of grass. The sediment does not preserve arguments, unfortunately, but later, human societies make the broader pattern impossible to ignore. As people developed more permanent settlements, sleeping surfaces became increasingly specialized. Mats were separated from work areas. Platforms raised bodies above dirt and crawling pests. Wooden frames improved airflow and made it easier to store possessions underneath. Then humans did what humans reliably do whenever a practical object works well. They turned it into a social ranking system. Some people slept on simple mats. Some slept on raised frames. Some had carved furniture, woven covers, pillows, curtains, servants, and enough decorative material to make unconsciousness look politically important. In several early civilizations, elevated beds became associated with wealth because they required timber, labor, craftsmanship, textiles, and indoor space. The higher the sleeper moved above the floor, the more visible the difference became between those who owned furniture and those who remained on mats, skins, or bare ground. Humanity had successfully transformed lying down into a status competition. No activity was safe. The bed began as separation from the ground. Then it became separation from public life. Privacy, however, was never distributed equally. For much of history, many people still slept communally, shared beds, or used the same room for eating, working, storing goods, and resting. A private bedroom is extremely recent compared with the behavior of building bedding itself. The grass layer came first. The individual room came much later. And beneath every frame, curtain, status symbol, and social rule, the original problem remained exactly where it had always been, below the sleeper, the floor. So why did humans start sleeping on beds? The honest answer is that there was probably no single moment when someone invented the bed. No dramatic breakthrough. No prehistoric genius standing in a cave, staring at the ground, and announcing that the floor had been defeated. The behavior likely emerged gradually from an older tendency to build sleeping nests, then changed as hominins spent more time on the ground, used fire, occupied shelters repeatedly, and learned to manage the materials around them. What we know is this. By at least around 200,000 years ago, people at Border Cave in southern Africa were gathering grasses and placing them in concentrated layers inside the shelter. Those plant layers were probably used for sleeping, resting, and daily activities. Some lay above ash. At Sabudu Cave, around 77,000 years ago, people repeatedly built plant bedding from sedges and other materials, including leaves from a tree whose aromatic compounds can affect insects. Some old bedding appears to have been burned. That is the evidence. The interpretation begins after that. The ash may have helped reduce moisture or discourage crawling pests. The aromatic leaves may have been selected because they smelled pleasant, stayed fresh, or reduced insect activity. Burning may have served as sanitation, floor maintenance, accidental fire, or some combination of those things. We cannot recover the exact intention behind every layer. And we should not pretend that a pile of grass is automatically a modern bed. It may have been shared. It may have been used for working as well as sleeping. It may not have belonged to any single person. But the larger pattern is difficult to miss. Humans were modifying the surface beneath vulnerable bodies. They were creating insulation from cold ground, distance from moisture, cushioning for bones and joints, a partial barrier against insects and dirt, a cleaner area for rest, a predictable zone inside an unpredictable environment. Then they maintained that zone. They replaced it. They burned it. They selected materials. They returned to it. And eventually they built social expectations around it. So, the short answer is comfort. But prehistoric comfort was not luxury. It was reduced heat loss, fewer bites, less dampness, better rest, cleaner living space, lower risk. The long answer is that beds helped humans do something our species does constantly. We take a hostile environment, alter one small part of it, and then behave as if the improved version was normal all along. That is why the first bed matters. It was not merely a soft place to lie down. It was a controlled environment for an unconscious body. Look at your bed tonight. Not the style, not the size, not the mattress brand promising to transform your spine through technology previously available only to astronauts. Look at what the bed actually does. It lifts your body away from the floor. It creates distance from dust, dampness, insects, cold surfaces, and the general biological enthusiasm of everything that lives beneath furniture. The mattress cushions your hips and shoulders. The sheets create a washable barrier. The blanket traps warm air. The frame raises you above dirt and crawling pests. The room reduces noise, weather, light, and unwanted access. Every layer solves some version of the same problem humans were already solving with grass and ash hundreds of thousands of years ago. How do you make a body vulnerable enough to sleep without making it completely available to the environment? That is the real function of a bed. It is not merely furniture. It is a small zone of controlled conditions where a human being can stop monitoring the world. And that may be why beds feel so personal. You can sit in almost any chair, stand on almost any floor, lean against almost any wall. But sleeping requires permission. The surface must feel clean enough, warm enough, soft enough, familiar enough, safe enough. A strange bed can keep you awake even when nothing is visibly wrong. The sheets feel different. The room sounds wrong. The air smells unfamiliar. Your brain continues checking the environment long after your body has decided it is exhausted. Some part of you is still asking the ancient question, can I become unconscious here? At Border Cave, someone answered that question by gathering grass. At Cebudu, people may have answered it with selected leaves, repeated maintenance, and fire. You answer it with mattresses, locked doors, washed sheets, curtains, alarms, and one last completely unnecessary look at your phone. The technology changed. The body did not. Every night, you return to a small island above the ground. You arrange the temperature, remove the insects, reduce the light, pull material over your body. Then you close your eyes and trust that the world will remain where you left it until morning. That trust is older than bedrooms, older than furniture, possibly older than our species. 200,000 years later, you are still performing the same ancient ritual. You build a soft, warm, clean patch above the floor, surrender consciousness, and hope that nothing beneath you is coming up for dinner.